Hi everyone, tonight we're going to time travel somewhere. You probably don't want to go, but we're doing it anyway. Imagine this, you wake up with the taste of wood smoke and old onions in your mouth. You're wrapped in a blanket that used to be a sack, and your pillow is a chicken. The floor beneath you is dirt, real living dirt full of bugs, and maybe something squirming. You don't know what day it is, but it doesn't matter. You're a medieval peasant. Welcome to the worst Airbnb of your life. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and local time. I want to know who's up with me tonight. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started on tonight's journey together. You shuffle awake to the sound of pigs snorting right next to your ear. One of them might have peed in the straw again, it's hard to tell anymore. Your breath fogs the air. You pull the scratchy wool blanket over your head, but the cold comes in from the walls, from the floor, from your very bones. The sun hasn't risen yet, and already your back aches. Welcome to your one-room hut, which is technically half a house. The other half belongs to the livestock. The floor is packed mud, sometimes covered in straw, sometimes just manure. There's a fire pit in the center, no chimney, just a smoke hole in the roof. The air inside is a nice blend of ash, damp hay, and the occasional whiff of goat. You don't own this house, or the firewood, or the hay. You might not even own your own clothes. Technically, your lord owns everything, he just lets you use it while you're alive. Generous. The first joke of the day usually comes from your cousin Ethel, who says if you lie still long enough, the fleas will warm you. That's funny because it's true. Today is like every day. Work, pray, work again. You grab a stale piece of barley bread from the shelf. It's hard enough to hammer nails with. You soak it in some ale. Not fancy ale. Weak, homemade, barely alcoholic ale made by your wife in a pot that probably used to be a chamber pot. It's warm, though, and that's something. Outside, the sun struggles through the fog. The fields are waiting. You grab your wooden hoe and march out like a man going to war with dirt. You don't farm for yourself. You farm for your lord, and then for the church. What you get to keep might feed your family, assuming nobody's sick or injured or eaten by wolves this month. You glance across the narrow lane and see your neighbor Oswin yelling at a cow. The cow is winning. Oswin's had a rough year since his son fell into the well and his wife ran off with the tanner. His beard is full of nettles. He waves at you with a look that says, I think I'm cursed, but it might just be indigestion. You trudge past the village well. You don't drink from it unless you have to. People throw weird things in there. One time someone dropped a cursed doll into the bucket and blamed it for all the miscarriages that year. Historians still debate whether medieval people actually believed in sympathetic magic, or just used it to justify really bad years. You remember the flood last spring. The whole field was underwater, and then the Lord raised taxes because water enriches the soil. You laughed so hard you cried. Then you cried harder because the taxes were real. Around midday, your wife brings you a soup so thin you can see the bottom of the bowl. It's made of leeks, turnips, and hope. She smiles like it's a feast. You kiss her hand and tell her it's delicious. She knows you're lying, and that's okay. You both eat in silence, listening to the birds. One day she says we might have a goat. You say nothing because dreaming costs nothing, but disappointment is expensive. Back to work. The sun burns away the mist and your skin starts to itch. The wool you're wearing hasn't been washed since St. Cuthbert's Day. You scratch at a louse bite and whisper a prayer it's not infected. Last year, a man died from one that festered into something worse. You don't even know what it was called. They buried him with a shovel borrowed from the miller who still wants it back. As the sun dips low, you head home with aching knees. You pass by the manor stone walls, actual windows, fresh bread smell wafting through the gate. Your stomach growls. You pretend it's just the cold. Inside your hut, the fire's going strong, which means your son probably stole wood from the forest again. Technically illegal, technically necessary. You sit down with your family. Everyone's quiet. You can hear mice in the walls and someone outside muttering about witches again. You tuck your children in close. The youngest has a cough you don't like. You kiss his forehead and hope. You lie back on the straw. The roof above you is patchy, but you can see the stars through it. One of them blinks. Probably not a sign. Probably just your eyes. And just before sleep takes you, you wonder if tomorrow the Lord will ask for more. He always does. You wake up to the sound of a rooster that doesn't belong to you. Nothing does. The clothes on your back, technically part of your labor allowance. The bowl you eat from, carved from wood you weren't allowed to chop. The hut you sleep in, part of the manor estate granted to you in exchange for bending your back for a man who has never once touched a plow. But today is harvest tally day, which means after weeks of sweating in fields, scaring crows with bad songs, and hauling grain in burlap sacks that leak faster than a drunk monk's secrets, you finally see what it was all for. And guess what? Not for you. The Lord's steward shows up with a list and a sneer. He's wearing boots, real leather boots, and he smells like cloves. You haven't seen a clove in 20 years. He watches you unload the grain and says something snide like, "A bit thin this year, isn't it?" You grit your teeth. You don't tell him the crop went moldy during the last storm. You don't tell him the ox died and you had to plow the field yourself. You just nod. First sack goes to the Lord. Second sack goes to the church. Third sack surprise also the Lord for protection. You finally get to keep a half sack for your family. You do the math in your head and try not to cry. Your wife is already doing the same, staring at the grain like it's a funeral. You try to console yourself. At least it was a harvest year. Some years hail ruins the barley and you end up with nothing. In those years you pray the Lord forgets about you. He never does. Taxes aren't just in grain. You owe labor. You fix fences, repair roads, help dig ditches when the manor needs draining. That one time, the Lord decided to throw a feast for his third wife's cousin's night-naming ceremony. You spent 3 days roasting pigs and were allowed to lick the grease afterward. Generous. And then there are tithes. The church gets 1/10 of everything except joy because they take more than that. The priest tells you it's God's will. You wonder if God's ever been hungry. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you can pay in chickens or eggs. If you're not lucky, like last year, you have to give up your daughter's wedding dowry in coin. That still wasn't enough. You ended up owing favors, which meant extra labor. She married anyway. You cried the whole feast. Your son once asked why the Lord doesn't farm his own land. You laughed so hard you nearly lost a tooth. You told him he's too busy hunting deer and laws. The kid didn't get it. He will someday. You think about running. Just packing up and walking into the woods. Becoming a charcoal burner or a poacher. But you've heard the stories. The sheriffs hang people for less. You saw a man strung up last spring for stealing a rabbit. A rabbit. Besides, your entire life is here. This is your field, your mud, You're suffering, no one wants it, and that's what makes it yours. You glance toward the manor house. It's big stone and surrounded by apple trees you're not allowed to touch. One time your cousin climbed the wall and stole 3 apples. He got caught. They didn't kill him, but they made him dig the village cesspit for a month. He never looked at fruit the same way again. Sometimes, when the Lord is in a good mood, he lets the children dance on the manor lawn during festivals. You remember the May Day last year. Your daughter smiled so hard her face hurt. The next day your wife wept into her sleeves because the child had caught lice from the Lord's hounds. The animals eat better than you do, and they smell better too. You trudge back to your hut with your pitiful portion of grain. Your wife sighs and immediately starts calculating how many loaves it'll make. You'll stretch it with beans, lentils, maybe acorns if the season's good. And nettles always nettles. You hear a knock at the door. It's the steward again. He needs help clearing stones from the field. You haven't eaten yet, but you say yes. He walks away without thanking you. You stare at his back and imagine throwing a rock at it. A big one. Maybe from the pile he wants you to move. You smile at the thought. That's your lunch. You work until your fingers bleed. Literally. No gloves, no rest. Just you and the land that isn't yours. You don't get paid. You get privilege. That's what they call not starving. As the sun begins to set, you look around and realize something: you're still standing. That's no small thing. Tomorrow it'll be the same. But you'll get up. You'll eat your bitter bread. You'll haul your aching body across the same muddy path. Because this is your life, and somehow you're surviving. It hasn't rained in weeks. The earth is so dry it cracks like an old man's knuckles, and your boots, well, your boots are just bits of leather tied together with twine crunch with every step. You poke at the soil with a stick, and it puffs up like flour. That's not a good sign. You need moisture worms, anything living. Instead, you get dust. Dust and silence. The wheat is barely knee-high and already yellowing. You whisper to it like that'll help. It won't. But it makes you feel like you're doing something. Famine doesn't show up like the plague. It doesn't ring church bells or pile up corpses in carts. It creeps. It begins with skinny chickens and limp vegetables. It gets worse when the rats start nibbling at your seed stores. And then one morning you wake up to find your youngest child too weak to cry. You know what's coming. You've seen it before. Last time you chewed bark. Not metaphorically real bark peeled from trees soaked in water and mashed into something sort of chewy. Not tasty, but it keeps your jaw moving. Moving means living. You also made something called famine bread. It sounds noble, but it's mostly powdered roots, crushed acorns, a few scraps of rye, and enough ashes to make it vaguely gray. Your wife adds wild sorrel and salt when there is salt. She's convinced it tastes better if you sing while baking it. You try. It doesn't. The famine of 1315 still haunts you. That summer the rains didn't stop. Everything rotted in the fields. Grain molded before it could be harvested. The roads turned to soup. You slipped twice carrying sacks of half-rotten barley and ended up sleeping with a bruised rib and a bitter heart. They say some folks up north resorted to eating cats. Some say even worse. Historians still debate whether cannibalism was truly widespread or exaggerated by panicked chroniclers. You don't know, you do remember that you stopped looking stray dogs in the eye. Now the Lord's grain stores are locked tight. He says it's to prevent thieves. You say it's to keep you desperate. But you only say that to the pigs. The church hands out mercy alms on saints' days, but it's never enough. a crust of bread, maybe a fish. One time you got half an onion and thought it was a sign from God. You offered the priest a song in thanks. He asked if you knew any that didn't involve sarcasm. So you do what peasants have always done, you adapt. You gather, you beg. You steal, but only from the forest, and only what the Lord won't notice. Nettles, dock, and dandelion roots go into the stew. If you're lucky, maybe a hedgehog. Roasted hedgehog wrapped in clay is actually decent if you ignore the prickles. You dig a pit in the earth to store your remaining grain, hoping the rats don't find it before you do. You pray the spring rains will be kind this year. You pray the seed will sprout. You pray a lot, actually. Mostly to saints with names you can't pronounce. At this point, you'd pray to a moldy turnip if it meant a decent harvest. Your kids are always hungry. You tell stories at night just to distract them from their stomachs. You tell tales of golden fields and bread that never ends. You speak of apples as big as your fist and rivers that flow with milk. You say it with a straight face because they need to believe in something, even if it's fiction. But you also teach them real skills: how to trap a rabbit with string, how to test a mushroom with a silver spoon, how to dig for roots that won't kill you. Survival isn't taught here, it's absorbed. You remember the time your grandmother made soup from old bones and boiled cabbage water? You thought it was the best thing you'd ever tasted. Now you know better. But you also know worse. One day your neighbor drops by, face pale, hands shaking. He says his wife hasn't moved in 2 days. You follow him home. She's still breathing barely. You bring her some nettle tea and what's left of your leek. He tries to give you his only blanket in return. You refuse. The warmth is in the gesture. Later, you go to bed with your stomach growling and your heart a little warmer. And still, every morning you rise. You check the soil. You water the seedlings. You gather herbs. You ration the bread. You hope. You live inch by inch, because that's how you beat famine. Not in grand victories, but in stubborn, sweaty, day-after-day survival. It's not poetic, but it's real. And for now, real is enough. There's a strange silence over the village this morning. No hammers, no roosters, no coughing neighbors. Just the soft creak of doors being opened slowly and eyes peering out like mice testing for traps. You step outside and instantly know something's wrong. The air smells off, sweet and sickly like meat left too long in the sun. You don't need anyone to tell you. You've lived long enough to recognize the signs. Plague is here. You first heard whispers about it weeks ago. A merchant passing through said entire towns were quiet now, and not in a peaceful way. There were tales of boils of men dropping dead mid-sentence, of priests dying faster than they could give last rites. You'd laughed it off until Oswin's youngest stopped showing up at the well. Now you see the straw. Bundles of it are stuffed under door cracks all down the lane. A desperate trick meant to keep the bad air out, the miasma, they call it. You tried it once during the last fever season. All it did was attract mice. Your daughter clutches your arm. "Papa," she says, "is it here? You want to lie." You don't. The church bell tolls once, slowly, then again. You count 6 before it stops. You know what that means. 6 deaths already. The strange thing is, it doesn't even look like a sickness at first. A cough here, a shiver there. Someone stumbles home early from the fields. Someone else starts muttering nonsense. Then the boils come, big black swellings, underarms, neck, groin. They call them buboes. And if you see them, you run, or you dig. The graveyard fills quickly. You help dig mostly because no one else will. The priest offers a blessing from 12 feet away. God's punishment, he says, for our sins. You look around at the mourners, skinny and silent, and wonder what sin could possibly justify this. You know this isn't the first time the plague has come. It swept through in 1348 and again a few years later. Some say it was spread by God. Others say by the Jews terrible rumors that led to worse violence. Some say the devil himself rides the wind. But deep down you think it's the rats. You've seen them big as cats with bold red eyes and tails like twisted rope. They scurry through the thatch and gnaw through grain sacks like demons with teeth. And always, always, where the rats go, the death follows. Your wife insists on garlic. She hangs it above the door, rubs it on the kids, even chews it raw. Your breath smells like a haunted kitchen. But you let her do it because it's something. You also try fumigating. You toss dried rosemary and sage into the fire until the hut smells like burnt soup. The priest says to avoid sin. The midwife says to drink vinegar. The miller says to drink ale and hope for the best. There's a man down the road who claims to have a cure. He wears a beak mask stuffed with herbs and walks around poking people with a stick. The children call him Crowface. You haven't seen him save a soul yet, but he does look impressive. He charged your neighbor 3 eggs to sniff her. You tie a sprig of lavender to your shirt and hold your breath whenever someone sneezes. You wash your hands with soap made of lye and pig fat. Burns like a curse, but maybe it helps. You avoid the church, the tavern, the well, and yet somehow the sickness still comes. You lose Oswin. One day he's coughing. The next he's gone. His wife disappears after that, some say to the woods. Some say to the grave. You never find out. Historians still debate whether the Black Death killed 1/3 or half of Europe. You don't care about numbers. You care about faces, and yours are vanishing. Then just as suddenly as it came, the plague slows. The bells toll less often. The gravedigger returns to his cart business. The priest looks less terrified. The silence begins to fade, replaced by the tentative sounds of life. You emerge from your hut like a mole blinking in sunlight. The air smells sweeter, not good, but not death. Your children survived. Your wife is still beside you. You've aged 5 years in 5 weeks, but you're alive. You light a candle for Oswin and all the others. You plant onions over the graves. Someone has to remember them. Then you go back to the fields, because that's what peasants do. It's been 2 weeks since the last bell rang. 2 weeks since the last body was dragged on a cart down to the far edge of the graveyard and buried without a name. And yet, you haven't died, which means you're doing something right. Probably. So you double down on everything that seems to be keeping death off your doorstep. You crush onions and smear them on your chest. You wear a leather pouch full of dried sage and chicken feathers around your neck. You keep windows open when the wind is from the east, but closed when it's from the west, because someone once said, that's where pestilence comes from. It might have been the butcher's wife, or a goat. Memory's fuzzy these days. You also adopt new habits. You burn straw under the bed. You whisper Latin you don't understand. You hold your breath when walking past the well. One time you rub crushed emerald on a sore spot under your arm because you heard somewhere that precious stones could draw out poison. All you got was a green armpit and a suspicious wife. Your neighbor tries bathing in vinegar. You try not to gag every time he walks past. Desperation makes you creative. You remember your grandmother once said tying a live toad to your foot would cure the plague. You try it. The toad is unimpressed. So are your children. But the important part is that you're trying. Everyone's trying. When the world doesn't make sense, superstition becomes science. If someone survives, whatever they were doing becomes the new gospel. And if they die well, then you know not to do that. And yet, somewhere deep in your gut, you suspect none of this is really working. You think about that one guy who just kept drinking ale and chewing mint leaves and lived. Meanwhile, the village midwife who wore charms from 6 saints and a relic of Saint Vitus died in her sleep. Historians still debate whether any of these folk cures had any real effect. The truth is, survival seems more like a cruel lottery than a reward for cleverness. Still, you pick another sprig of mint just in case. You hear tales from downriver that the plague has come and gone twice already in some places. In others, it never left. You wonder if maybe you'll spend the rest of your life running from something you can't see, can't fight, can't even name properly. You call it the pestilence, the black breath, the scourge. But mostly, you just call it it. And it is always just behind the trees. The worst part is the waiting. The long days when no one gets sick, but no one laughs either. When the fields are half-tilled because people are afraid to touch the tools of the dead. When the church is too quiet and even the birds seem suspicious. One day, a man in bright clothes and a silver cross comes to the village. He claims to be a plague reader, whatever that means. He says your village was spared because you live righteously. He says this as he pockets 5 eggs and a gold coin from the priest. He also says rubbing rose oil on your temples and staring at the moon can prevent illness. You don't trust him. But you stare at the moon that night anyway. Because deep down, you're not just trying to survive, you're trying to make sense of it. You walk through the field and see a single stalk of wheat growing tall, golden, untouched. You don't harvest it. You leave it alone. It feels sacred now. Like a promise that maybe, just maybe, the land isn't done with you. That night, your wife lights a candle in a turnip and sets it on the windowsill. It flickers against the dark, and for once the house feels warm. The children sleep peacefully. Your body aches, but it's the good kind, the kind that reminds you you're still moving. You lie down, stare at the ceiling, and listen to the wind in the thatch. You think about all the things you've done to stay alive. Most of them make no sense, but they gave you purpose, something to do, some small illusion of control in a world spinning out of it. And maybe, just maybe, that illusion was enough. You survived another day. You never thought you'd miss the monastery, but here you are, barefoot, limping slightly, and praying the monks still have leeches left. Your wife's leg is swollen. Not plague boils swollen, thank all the saints, but red, warm, and pulsing with pain. She says she stumbled in the woods. You think she stepped on a thorn. Either way, it's infected. And when things get infected, things get cut off. So now you're at the stone steps of St. Hubert's Abbey, holding a basket of eggs and half a wheel of very questionable cheese as a peace offering. You know the monks aren't supposed to charge for care, but everyone knows Brother Gerald won't touch your wound without encouragement. Inside, the abbey smells like wax incense and cabbage stew. You hear the low chant of psalms echoing through the stone corridors. It's almost soothing if you ignore the faint moaning coming from the infirmary wing. Brother Gerald greets you with the same expression he uses for both patience and overripe turnips, squinting skepticism. He takes one look at your wife's leg and nods. "We'll start with prayers," he says. Then he opens a jar of leeches. You try not to flinch as he places the first one on her skin. The leech latches on immediately. You try not to be jealous of how decisively it makes decisions. While you wait, Brother Gerald mixes up a concoction of mashed garlic honey and ground mustard seed. He calls it a poultice. You call it witchcraft salad dressing. Still, when he wraps it on her leg, she sighs in relief. That's medieval medicine. A curious blend of herbs, chants, and bloodletting. No one quite knows why anything works if it works, but people are desperate enough to try it all. You've seen a man cured of fever after being bled with a copper razor. You've also seen a woman bled for a toothache only to pass out and never wake up. Historians still debate how much of medieval medicine helped and how much simply looked helpful until the patient either recovered or didn't. Still, the monks are your best hope. Better than the barber who once tried to treat a sprain with hot tar. Better than the hedge witch who offered to bury your wife's sock at a crossroads under a full moon. Brother Gerald gives you a scroll with prayers in Latin. You can't read it, but you nod seriously and promise to recite it twice a day. You won't, but he seems comforted by the idea. On the way out, you pass the herb garden. There's yarrow comfrey horehound, and something that looks like it might be poisonous but smells amazing. A novice monk is tending the plants. You ask him what works best for pain. He shrugs and says, "Ale, mostly." Smart man. Back home, you tuck your wife in and spoon some of the leftover garlic honey goop onto her bread. She winces, eats it anyway. You hold her hand until she drifts off. Her fever breaks that night. You feel like a wizard. The truth is, the line between healing and harming in your world is razor thin. You've seen people survive arrow wounds but die of splinters. You've watched a child live through a pox outbreak only to be undone by bad water a week later. You remember the old herbalist who once told you, "The body wants to live. All we can do is not make it harder." You weren't sure what she meant at the time. You think you get it now. The next morning your wife can stand. She even smiles. You count that as a miracle. Not a thunderbolt from heaven kind of miracle, just a quiet, aching, real one. You decide to make your own medicine chest. You gather mint marigold and yarrow from the fields. You dry mushrooms, carefully labeling the ones that won't kill you. You even brew a syrup from elderberries, honey, and desperation. Will it work? Who knows? But it feels like hope in a bottle. And for now, hope is healing enough. You haven't seen meat in weeks. Your ribs are more familiar to your hands than your own children's faces. So tonight's dinner, an actual bowl of soup with floating things in it, feels like a royal banquet. You don't ask what the things are. Your wife says it's spring stew. You suspect it's Nettles, leeks, wild garlic, and possibly the last of the boiled bones that have been reused more times than your grandfather's boots. There's also something stringy that might be rabbit or rat. Either way, you sip slowly and nod approvingly. She beams like she just served goose stuffed with pears. Feeding a family of 6 on a peasant's scraps is like trying to patch a boat with damp bread. Every day is a gamble, a puzzle, and a prayer. You learn to stretch ingredients further than nature ever intended. Oats become gruel, barley becomes cakes, and weeds become dinner. You become an expert in what not to eat. Cursed mushrooms, wormy apples, the blackened rye that makes your cousin see snakes in the ceiling. You remember that year he ate moldy bread and spent 3 days screaming about demons chewing his feet. Historians still debate whether it was ergot poisoning or divine punishment. You just stopped eating black bread. There's no shame in soup made from weeds. Everyone does it. You trade tips with your neighbors like chefs comparing wine pairings. Boil the nettles longer. Soak the acorns overnight. Add a rock to the pot, it thickens the broth. That last one is probably a joke. Probably. Once a week you go foraging. It's equal parts food run and treasure hunt. The forest is stingy, but you know where the wild sorrel hides, which streams grow watercress, and which tree bark doesn't taste like despair. Sometimes you find mushrooms if you're lucky. If you're unlucky, you find the same mushrooms and have hallucinations so vivid you swear you danced with St. Cuthbert in the moonlight. You avoid those now. Mostly. Your children help small hands darting through bramble and brush. They know the difference between edible and possibly fatal better than some apothecaries. Survival has made them wise, and a little weird. One of them keeps talking to a rock. You don't question it. The communal oven is down again. A crack in the stone. So tonight you bake your flatbread over an open flame. It burns on one side, soggy on the other. Perfect. You smear it with bean paste and a scrap of pickled turnip. The little ones complain. Why don't we ever eat real food, one whines. You tell them this is real food. This is the kind of food that builds bones, sharpens wits, and fuels revolutions. Peasant food isn't fancy, but it's the kind that keeps you standing after 3 days of plague frost and famine. They're unimpressed. You toss in a joke about how noblemen don't even chew their food. They just drink swan broth from golden cups while someone reads poetry to their feet. That gets a giggle. Then you remember one time the Lord's cook did spill swan broth on his shoes. He made her lick it off. You didn't laugh then. You're not laughing now. Still, there's joy in your little kitchen. The pot bubbles. The fire crackles. The children are full enough. You even save a spoonful of broth for the sickly neighbor next door. He coughs like a dying sheep, but thanks you like a king. That night as you scrape the pot clean with a hunk of stale bread, you feel something strange satisfaction. Not fullness. That's rare. But contentment brief and fragile like a candle in wind. You've learned to survive on less than nothing, and somehow you've made it feel like more than enough. You wake up sore. Not I slept funny sore, no, this is, I carried society on my back while getting taxed into oblivion sore. Today's the day. The steward is coming. You check the corner where you've hidden your grain sacks. You counted every kernel twice last night. Once for yourself and once for the man who will take most of it. Tax day in your village is less of an event and more of a slow-moving ritual of public humiliation. The Lord's steward arrives on horseback even though the road is barely fit for goats. He's wearing a cloak so clean it glows. You hate him already. Behind him trail the scribes, the muscle-some lads from the next village with clubs and the tally board. The board's just a big plank where they carve what you owe. They say it's to be transparent. You say it's to be terrifying. You wait in line behind Oswin's cousin, who tried to claim his chicken count was confused by shadows. The steward fined him double for lying. The chicken, of course, had no comment. Your turn. You kneel because everyone kneels. The steward squints at your records, or rather the ones the priest wrote down last season. You don't get to write your own numbers. That would be chaos, apparently. 3 sacks grain, 2 hens, 6 days' labor owed, he mutters. You open your mouth to argue you gave 1 sack during the plague, but the look he gives you makes your words dry up like beans in a pot too long on the fire. You hand over the grain. You try not to think about how that was your winter store. The hens are next. Your youngest daughter clutches one tightly, eyes wet. You gently take it from her arms. She doesn't cry. That's worse. The labor will come later. Fence repair, moat digging, manure hauling, whatever the Lord dreams up after his fifth goblet of claret. You think that's it. It's not. There's a hearth tax now, the steward says casually. A what? If you've got a fire, you pay for the right to use it. You laugh. Not the polite kind. The kind that makes your ribs ache. He doesn't laugh back. You pay. By the end of the day, your family has one sack of grain, no hens, and a lingering sense of injustice. You try to explain feudal obligations to your son. He asks if the Lord would ever pay you. You say, sure, when pigs fly in formation and write poetry. Then you remember pigs do fly, off the manor cart into the Lord's feast, never to be seen again. The church isn't much better. Tithes are due soon. 10% of what you earn, even if what you earn is just bruises and empty pots. The priest says it's for your soul. You ask if he takes barley for absolution. He says he prefers coin. Sometimes you dream about building a little hut in the woods and living off mushrooms. But you know the moment you leave your field, your hut, your family's little strip of survival, the world will swallow you whole. You're taxed for being born, taxed for breathing the Lord's air, taxed for having teeth until you don't, and then taxed for dying with dignity. One time a neighbor died owing taxes. They took his boots off his corpse. His boots. Still you pay. Because if you don't, there's punishment. The stocks, the lash, exile. You remember that boy who refused to pay, said it was unfair, brave, bold. They broke 3 of his fingers in front of the village and made him watch as his house was burned. He pays now with a limp. Back at home, your wife hugs you. She already knows what's gone and what's left. She offers the last crust to you. You break it in half. That's your tax on her kindness. At least tomorrow you only owe labor. At least tomorrow they can't take more. Right. You're jolted awake in the middle of the night by shouting, then barking, then silence. The kind of silence that's too heavy to be safe. You grab a torch and rush outside. The sky is dark except for a strange glow to the east. Orange. Flickering. You don't even need to ask. You run. Oswin's barn is on fire. By the time you reach it, the roof has collapsed. Flames snap and spit like they're laughing. A cow bellows somewhere behind the blaze. You see Oswin stumbling with a pail that's more hole than bucket. It's hopeless. A few villagers show up, slapping dirt with rags, throwing water from wooden pans. But fire moves faster than hands, and fear freezes more than just the blood. By dawn, the barn is gone. So is most of his stored grain, 1 ox, and the only wagon his family owned. He sits in the dirt, staring at the blackened timbers like they might reassemble if he just wills it hard enough. You sit beside him. He doesn't say anything. Neither do you. Because what's there to say? There's no fire brigade, no compensation, no emergency fund, no justice. This is peasant life. If your house burns, you rebuild it. If your food burns, you go hungry. If your life burns, you just keep digging. You give Oswin your last coil of rope and a few nails. Someone else offers a plank. There's no lord to help. No scribe comes to take down a report. No law arrives to investigate. There is law, of course, technically, but it doesn't protect you. The law protects property, and mostly just the lords. You remember when someone stole apples from the manor orchard. They tracked the boy down like a fox and branded his hand. But when the same lord's dog killed a baby pig in the village, an act of God, they said. Historians still debate how structured justice really was for medieval peasants. Spoiler, not very. Your only real court is gossip, revenge, and prayer, so you rely on the village. That's your real shield. Your family, your neighbors. People who will bring a loaf when your flour runs out or help thatch your roof when a storm rips it off. But even community has limits. A week after the fire, someone steals Oswin's shovel. He swears he'll find the thief and bash his head in with a log. You believe him. He's been talking to the scorched ground like it owes him answers. You try to tell him when there's no justice, people lose more than their stuff. They lose faith. Theft isn't rare. In winter, someone will always sneak into someone else's shed for kindling or cured meat. You've done it. They've done it. It's not evil. It's desperation. But when the fires start, when hunger becomes flame, that's when it gets dangerous. You remember the year the granary burned. Some said it was lightning. Others said the miller did it to cover up moldy stores. No one proved anything. But the next week, his cart accidentally lost a wheel on the hill, with him still inside it. That's justice, or vengeance. Maybe both, maybe neither. You try to teach your children how to be honest, but also how not to be stupid. Don't steal, you say, unless it's from someone who stole first. Morality here bends like wet wood. It has to. You nail new planks over your hut door. Not that it'll stop anyone. If someone wants in, they'll get in. Locks are a luxury. Trust is your currency. That night you sleep lightly. Every creak in the thatch sounds like a footstep. Every breeze feels like a warning. In the morning, nothing's missing. You thank the saints, or the rats, whoever's listening. And then you go back to the field. Because even if the world's on fire, the weeds won't pull themselves. It starts with a cow. Old Merelda's cow, to be exact. Stops giving milk, then collapses, then dies with its legs twisted like roots and eyes cloudy as pond water. Unusual, but not unheard of. Animals die. Life goes on. Except Merelda says it was cursed. Look at the hooves, she whispers, showing the deep split in the poor thing's leg. That's not sickness. That's spell work. You'd laugh, but no one else is laughing. Someone mutters that she'd been arguing with Hilda, the herb woman, just last week. Something about a bad batch of salve and a missing chicken. That's all it takes. Within hours, people are talking in low voices, glancing sideways at Hilda's hut. Someone says they saw her dancing in the woods by moonlight. Someone else swears she talks to her cat like it answers back. Your son says she gave him honey when he scraped his knee. You remind him to forget that story. By nightfall, she's being watched. The priest gives a sermon about darkness lurking even in the hearts of neighbors. The steward shows up not to help, of course, but to suggest she leave for everyone's safety. That's when you know it's turning serious. The next morning, Hilda's gone. The cat is still there. You find it meowing outside your door, so you give it a bit of milk. That night, your neighbor's daughter has a fever, and suddenly people are looking at your hut like it might start glowing green. You get defensive. You tell your wife to throw out the herb bundles. You scrub the floors. You snap at the cat. It vanishes. By now, people are scared enough to believe anything. You've seen this before. Last spring, a woman 2 villages over was ducked in the river for spoiling the weather. She died, of course. Drowned, proving she wasn't a witch. Historians still debate how widespread and systematic medieval witch trials were in this era. But for peasants like you, fear is faster than fact. The law doesn't need to arrive in robes, it arrives in pitchforks and whispers. Your neighbor Oswin keeps a knife in his boot now. Says it's for safety. He means in case the wrong person looks at him the wrong way. Everyone's walking on cobwebs. You start avoiding eye contact. That's safer. Then the bread spoils. You bite into it and find black mold like a bruise across your breakfast. Your wife looks at it, then at you, then says, "We should burn the rest." You know what she means. She doesn't mean the bread. By next week, the rumors have passed on to a new target. some boy accused of seeing demons in the woods. You sigh in relief. You don't feel good about it, but at least they've forgotten about your family. Hilda never comes back. You find her mortar and pestle by the river one day, cracked in half. You think about the strange ways the village tries to stay in control when the world turns upside down. Plague God's punishment. Famine bad omens. A cough, a curse. It's easier to blame than to bear the weight of randomness. You try to hold on to reason, but reason doesn't fill bellies or scare away death. Fear does. That night your daughter asks what a witch is. You hesitate. Then you say, someone people don't understand. She nods. Then she asks, are you one? You laugh. But it's tight, quiet. No, you say, not yet. You stare at the fire, and for a moment you wonder how thin the line really is between healer and heretic helper and harbinger. Between you and whoever's next. A year after the last plague wave, the village throws a feast. Not a, we have plenty kind of feast. More of a, we didn't all die, so let's celebrate while we can still chew sort of gathering. It's crude, chaotic, and a little unhinged. But honestly, it's the most fun you've had since that time Oswin got drunk and mistook a pig for a bishop. The church bells ring, not for death this time, but for dancing. You drag your old tunic out from under the bed. It smells like moths and regret, but it's better than your everyday wool sack. Your wife braids flowers into her hair. The kids run barefoot, squealing. Someone plays a pipe with 3 working notes. That's 2 more than usual. There's bread, white bread, if you can believe it. Probably from the manor's leftovers. There's dried apples, tough as leather, but sweet enough to make your teeth ache. There's a whole roast goose in the center of the feast table. You don't ask whose goose it was. You just eat it. Then the dancing begins. It's clumsy and sweaty and joyous. No one knows the steps. Oswin tries to spin your wife and ends up sitting in a puddle. Your son invents a jig involving elbows and sneezing. You think it might be contagious. You dance anyway, because you survived. Not just you, everyone still standing. The old men with their missing teeth. The widows with tired eyes. The children born in the middle of a famine, who now laugh like the world's always been kind. For one glorious evening, the fields are forgotten. The debts, the taxes, the bad bread, the nights of cold hunger, all pushed aside like the bones from your stew. Even the priest joins in. He drinks too much mead and slurs a hymn into a love song. You catch the steward tapping his foot. It's not much, but it's something. There's a woman new to the village who tells fortunes. She takes your palm and says you'll live to see 100. You both laugh. She means it kindly, but you're not sure if living to 100 in your world is a blessing or a curse. Later, someone lights a bonfire. People dance around it until they drop. Someone tells a story about a man who married a tree. Someone else swears they once kissed a fairy in the woods. Nobody corrects them. That's the magic of post-plague joy. It doesn't have to make sense. It just has to be felt. Historians sometimes write that peasants were dour humorless, too consumed by toil to celebrate. But they didn't see nights like this. They didn't feel the heat of the fire on your cheeks, or taste joy mixed with dirt and desperation. They didn't hear Oswin shouting, "I'm still alive, you bastards," with tears in his beard and a pie in each hand. At some point, you lie back in the grass and look at the stars. You see shapes in them, a plow, a cat, a leech. Too many leeches in your life, frankly. The air smells of ash and sweat and something you can't name. It smells like survival. You fall asleep next to your wife, your children curled like puppies at your feet. No rats, no boils, no bells. Just the sound of someone softly humming a tune that hasn't been heard in years. You're not rich. You're not safe. But for this one night you are full, and in a peasant's life that's a miracle worth dancing for. The itching starts before you're even out of bed. You scratch your neck, then your arms, then your legs, then your soul. You're wearing wool again, and not the fine, tight-spun monastery-grade wool. No, this is peasant wool. Heavy, itchy, probably made from a sheep that was angry at the world and took it out on your shirt. Your tunic hasn't been washed in a month. Not because you're lazy, but because washing means water. Hot water. Soap, if you have any. And time. And if you have all those things at once, something has gone terribly wrong. The inside of your shirt feels like it's lined with hay and punishment. You shift uncomfortably. The lice shift with you. One of your kids calls from across the hut, "Papa, my pants bit me again." You nod solemnly. Yes, that happens. The truth is, everyone itches, all the time. Rich, poor, young, old, it doesn't matter. Your skin becomes a battleground. Lice, fleas, mites, they wage tiny wars under your sleeves and behind your knees. You once caught 4 fleas during church and crushed them between your thumbnail and a hymn. No one batted an eye. Bathing happens once a season. Twice if you're unlucky. The last time you tried the stream was still half frozen, and you got yelled at by a goose. You own 2 shirts. One's for everyday use. The other's for special occasions, like weddings, funerals, and taxation day. Both are brown, not by design, just gradually. You dream of linen. The priest has linen. It flows when he walks like he's being kissed by angels. Your clothes cling like damp moss. Still, you do what you can. You beat your tunic with a stick every few days. You hang it near the smoke to purify it, which mostly just makes you smell like a ham that got left out in the rain. Your wife boils water and drops in crushed rosemary and soapwort. You soak your socks in it. They smell better. The holes still laugh at you. One time, a traveling merchant offered you silk. You asked what it was. He said, "Like air turned to cloth." You asked what it cost. He said, 2 pigs and a promise never to touch garlic again. You walked away. The odd fact, there's a trend in some places to layer so many garments that people literally sew underclothes into their outerwear so they don't have to change anything for weeks or months. Fashionable filth. Historians still debate how often peasants actually bathed. Some say once a month. Others argue it depended on access to water. You argue it depends on how badly you want to freeze your backside off. But hygiene is relative. Sure, you stink. So does everyone else. You don't notice anymore. It's like the background music of your life. Just a low, sour hum of sweat, smoke, and soil. Your shoes, if you can call them that, are leather strips wrapped around your feet. They let in mudstones and sadness. The soles wore out 3 seasons ago. You patch them with rope and prayer. You try to keep your fingernails clean at least. Not for vanity, just so you don't accidentally poison yourself when picking your teeth. The village healer once told you, "Clean hands save lives." You laughed. She wasn't joking. Today you spend a full hour pulling burrs out of your trousers after working near the hedges. You find a beetle. It blinks at you. You name it Maurice and let it go. But here's the thing. Despite it all, the stink, the scratch, the state of your socks, you're still here. Still standing. Still feeding your kids, still sleeping beside your wife, still pulling your tunic over your head every morning like it's armor. Because in a way it is. You might not have silk or linen or shoes that don't sigh when you walk, but you have clothes. You have warmth. You have dignity and a few less fleas than last week. And that in your world is a win. It's Sunday, which sounds like it should mean something special, rest, peace, a nap. But it doesn't. Because you're a peasant, and in peasant world rest means hauling stones for the chapel, repairing the road to the manor, or helping lift a bell that cracked in half during last week's storm. Again, you rise before dawn and shake straw out of your boots. You gather your tools. You wake your son and tell him time to honor the Sabbath. He groans. You groan harder. The priest always says, 6 days you shall labor, and on the 7th you shall rest. What he means is 6 days you work for the land, and on the 7th you work for him. Today's task, fix the west wall of the village church. It's been leaning since winter. Every time it rains, it leans a little more. Last week a mouse sneezed and part of the plaster fell off. You and a dozen others are sent with shovels, hammers, and one very suspect ladder to go make the house of God slightly less likely to fall over during Mass. You don't mind helping. Not really. The church is where your children were christened, where your neighbors were married, where you buried your brother. It's part of your life whether you like it or not. But you do mind the hypocrisy. The priest never lifts a stone, just points at them, and says things like, "Let this labor be your offering." You want to offer him a shovel. You work all morning in the heat. Blisters bloom like mushrooms. You pause once just to wipe the sweat off your eyes, and the steward snaps, "Keep going. The Lord sees your labor." You mutter, "I hope he likes lopsided walls." There's no payment, of course. You're told your reward is spiritual. You say, "Can I eat spiritual bread?" No one laughs. Historians still debate whether religious labor obligations were voluntary or expected. You know the truth. It's not about law. It's about pressure. No one wants to be the one who didn't show up. You miss a church workday, and suddenly your name comes up next time there's a sick cow or spoiled grain. Coincidence, sure. At midday, you break for a simple meal, barley bread, sour cheese, and a single onion split between 4 people. You sit in the shade of the church, chewing and swatting flies. Someone jokes that if you dig too deep, you'll wake the bones of old Father Ulrich. Someone else says, "Good. Maybe he can help finish the wall." That gets a laugh. Laughter is rare. You savor it. After lunch, it's more of the same dig, lift, stack, wipe, curse softly. Your wife shows up with water. You kiss her cheek and she says, "You missed a spot." You look down. Your entire tunic is dust. She's not wrong. By sunset, the wall stands less crooked anyway. You're too tired to care. The priest blesses it with a sprinkle of holy water and a prayer that sounds suspiciously like, "Please don't fall over again." You drag yourself home. Your hands are raw. Your back creaks like an old door. Your feet are humming in a language only pain understands. At home, you're greeted not with a feast, but with a bucket of laundry. Your wife says it's your turn to scrub. You stare at her. She stares back. She wins. You wash socks in silence, reflecting on the holiness of sore fingers and soap in your eyes. Later that night, the kids ask if Sunday is a special day. You say yes. It's the day we work in nicer clothes, and somehow they still look forward to next week. News travels slowly in the countryside like a limping donkey carrying a drunken bard. But rumors have wings. So when you hear that peasants 3 villages over burned the tax records, your first thought isn't shock. It's envy. You're planting barley when the boy runs up the lane breathless, waving a stick like it's a sword. They set fire to the scribe's house, he shouts. They made the steward dance with a pitchfork at his back. Oswin leans on his hoe, grinning. About time someone stuck it to those powdered-bottom coin counters. You nod, not because you approve, not openly, but because deep inside you is a part that cheers. You've lived your whole life under the weight of silence. Heads down, hands calloused, mouth shut. But now something stirs. A whisper, then a murmur, then a question. What if we didn't have to live like this? It's not just you. At the well, the baker mutters that the miller raised prices again. In church, the priest's sermon on obedience feels thinner, stretched tight over growing unrest. People look at each other differently now, not just as neighbors, but as allies or suspects. You hear talk of the Peasants' Revolt down south, 1381. Names like Wat Tyler and John Ball passed like legends on the wind. When Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentleman someone quotes, and it makes the hair on your arms rise. Historians still debate how much the revolt was driven by ideals versus starvation. You don't care. All you know is this: someone said enough. But dreams of revolt come with real risks. You remember what happened to the tanner's son? He refused to work a conscription levy and shouted that the Lord wasn't his better. They tied him to a post and beat him with rods until his blood soaked into the dirt. That post is still there. You pass it every morning. So now you wonder if rebellion is rising. What would you do? Your wife says nothing when you bring it up. Just kneads bread harder than usual. You know what she's thinking? Rebellion might promise freedom, but it brings fire. It brings soldiers. It brings gallows. Still, part of you starts to dream. You dream of a field where you decide what to plant, of a granary that no one taxes, of a future where your children don't flinch every time a rider in rich colors appears on the road. You're not naive. You know most rebellions fail, but you also know that every crack in the manor wall starts as a whisper in a field. So you whisper. You talk to Oswin under the pretense of sharpening tools. You make jokes about noblemen tripping over their titles. You ask your eldest if he knows how to write. He shakes his head. You teach him your name, then his, then the word free. That night you sit by the fire and trace patterns in the ashes. Not battle plans, not oaths of vengeance, just possibilities. Maybe the Lord is right. Maybe peasants are meant to serve, to toil, to endure. But maybe not. Maybe pitchforks aren't just for hay. It starts with a loaf of bread. You didn't bake it, your wife did. But she used some of the old rye, the last sack from the back of the hut. You told her not to, but she insisted. It smells fine, she said. It didn't. You eat it anyway. Because hungry doesn't argue. Hungry swallows. The first hour you just feel strange, lightheaded, like you drank too much ale on an empty stomach. By sunset, the walls are moving, not physically, visually, waving like tall grass. Your legs turn to reeds, your eyes buzz. Then the real horror begins. You see things, not shadows, not dreams. Things, snakes crawling from the hearth. Your dead grandmother offering you soup. Your child made entirely of bees. You claw at your skin. You hear the dog speaking in Latin. You fall into the fire trying to swat a ghost. Your wife throws water on you screaming. You scream back at what you don't know. By midnight, you're lying on the floor, shivering, fevered, cursed, maybe dead, but you're not alone. Because Oswin is worse. He ate more of the bread. Thought it was delicious. Said it reminded him of childhood. Now he's running through the village naked, shouting that he's the Pope. Then he howls like a wolf. Then he bites the priest. Half the village is hallucinating. The other half is hiding. The bread is cursed, they say. Bewitched, a punishment from God. You know the truth. It's ergot, that black mold that sometimes grows on rye when the weather's been wet, and the grain's not stored right. It looks harmless, just a few dark specks, but inside it's poison. Not instant death. Worse, it melts your mind. Historians still debate how widespread ergotism was, or whether it sparked mass delusions and even witch panics. You're not debating. You're living it. The priest calls for a fast. No grain until the next blessing. The village complies. You spend 3 days sweating in bed, vomiting dreams. You see visions, some beautiful, some terrible. You see your children grown free. You see the Lord's house burning. You see a future with no fields, no chains. Then you wake up, exhausted, empty, alive. Oswin is not so lucky. He's been chained to his own bed. Eyes wild, mouth foaming. He thinks he's married to a turnip. His wife tells you she's honestly considering it. The steward blames witches again. The villagers mutter about sins. But you quietly burn the rest of the rye. The priest leads a procession chanting through the fields. You don't join. You're planting beans instead. Beans don't rot like rye. Beans don't whisper when you sleep. You learn your lesson. Food can betray you. Bread, the symbol of life, can become a doorway to madness. Still, you eat again, carefully, slowly. You tell your children how to spot the mold. You teach them to listen to their bodies. You remind them that even survival can be poisoned if you're not paying attention. That night, you stare into the fire, still shaken. Not by what you saw, but by how close it came, and how thin the line is between hunger and hallucination, between a loaf and a nightmare, between life and whatever that was. You smell yourself before anyone else does. It's faint at first, a sour, earthy musk. Not exactly bad, just noticeable. Like the scent of someone who spent a week in a potato sack under a haystack in a thunderstorm, which, if you think about it, isn't far off from your actual life. You haven't bathed in, you don't know, a while. But no one really notices, because no one else has either. Cleanliness isn't a virtue here. It's an accident. Still, some days the smell clings more than usual, especially after long hours in the field wrapped in wet wool and despair. So today you decide to do something radical. You're going to wash. You hike to the stream with a rag, a chunk of homemade soap lard and ashes mostly, and a hopeful heart. You scrub until your skin burns and flakes. You pretend that's purification. You scrub your armpits. You scrub your toes. You scrub behind your ears just in case the saints are watching. You emerge cleaner, not quite fresh, but less awful. And that's something. You rub yourself down with crushed mint leaves, then mugwort, then rosemary. The village healer says mugwort keeps spirits away. You say it keeps people away. Same thing. You used to care less. But ever since the steward's daughter passed through the village wearing rosewater and not itching, you've become self-conscious. She looked at you like you were part of the landscape. Which, to be fair, you kind of are. So you start experimenting. You chew parsley to freshen your breath. You tuck lavender in your tunic. You crush juniper berries and rub them on your neck. Your wife raises an eyebrow. You going courting, she asks. You grin. Maybe I'm just tired of smelling like despair. She laughs, then steals your mint. Here's a secret: even in a world of dirt and disease, scent matters. Not just for comfort, but for morale, for hope. When you smell like earth, you feel like earth trampled, forgotten. But when you smell like rosemary, you feel possible. You start sharing herbs with others. Oswin likes thyme. Merelda uses marigold. The village begins to smell, slightly less like a compost heap, a small miracle. You even start to wash your shirt occasionally, not often, just enough to keep it from crunching when you move. You hang it by the fire to dry. The kids gather around it like it's a relic. Of course, there are still bad days, like the time you tried to make perfume using boiled onions and nettles. That did not go well. The dog refused to come near you. Your wife made you sleep outside. Or the time you stepped into a puddle and spent the day smelling like swamp ghost. But even then, you noticed you cared. That's new. Historians often gloss over peasant hygiene, painting it as uniformly filthy. But truth is, people tried. They scraped. They scrubbed. They masked what they couldn't fix. Because even when life was hard, it didn't mean they wanted to stink. At night, you lie next to your wife. She leans in, sniffs, and says, "You smell like mint and firewood." You whisper, "That's my new cologne." She chuckles, "Don't quit your day job," but she kisses your cheek and lingers just a second longer than usual. And in that moment, in the soft scent of something other than suffering, you remember that survival isn't just about living. It's about feeling alive. The cold arrives without asking. No knock at the door. No warning. Just a sharp wind that slices through the thatch, finds every crack in your bones, and settles in like an unwelcome guest. You wake up with frost on your blanket. Inside the hut, the water in the pail is a solid block. Your breath curls into the air like smoke. The baby won't stop crying. You can't blame him. You want to cry too. Winter in the medieval village is not just a season, it's a siege. You don't fight it. You endure it. First you ration. Bread gets thinner. Stew gets stretchier. You boil the same bones twice, then thrice. You spice it with whatever's left: onions if you're lucky, wood chips if you're not. You burn everything that will burn. Old stools, busted tools, your cousin's wedding gift. Sorry, Oswin. Anything to keep the fire going. Because when the fire dies, so might someone else. You sleep in shifts. One person always tends the flame. You curl up together. Your wife, your kids, the dog, the goat. The heat of 5 bodies and 2 animals can save a life. You wear every piece of clothing you own at once. Your tunic, your cousin's cloak, 3 pairs of socks with holes in different places. You look like a walking haystack. You don't care. Outside, the snow buries the world. The trees groan under the weight. The chickens stop laying. The oxen huddle. The sky turns the color of dirty wool. Your son asks if the sun is broken. You say no, but you're not sure. Then comes the worst night. The wind shrieks. The fire sputters. You run out of dry wood. You consider burning the door. You gather your family and huddle under the largest blanket. Your breath freezes on your lips. You hold your children tighter. You tell them stories not because they're good stories, but because your voice makes them stop shaking. You tell them about spring, about flowers and bees and walking barefoot in warm dirt. They ask if it's real or just a dream. You say both. In the morning, the roof has a hole. Snow's drifted onto your pillow. Your toes are numb. But you're alive. Barely. You find one last sack of oats behind the flour bin. It's stale. You cry a little, then make gruel. You visit Oswin. He's lost 2 fingers. Frostbite. He doesn't complain. He just asks if you want to play dice. You do. You lose. He grins. It's the first smile you've seen in days. Historians often mention winter as a time of rest. No planting, no harvesting. They forget to mention the suffering. Winter is hunger with icicles. It's pain that cracks your skin and steals your breath. You become inventive. You make socks from old curtains. You stuff straw into boots. You learn which part of the pig you can still eat even if it smells weird. You boil water just for the steam. You mark the days on the wall. Scratches beside the hearth. You count them like a prisoner. And then finally one morning the air smells different. Not warm, but less cruel. A drip from the eaves. A bird call. Mud where snow once ruled. The baby giggles. You smile. You made it, not because you were stronger, not because you were smarter, but because you were stubborn. And in a world like this, stubbornness is your greatest weapon. Your daughter's fever starts with a whimper, not a scream, not a moan. Just a small sound from her corner of the hut, barely more than a breath. You turn toward her squinting through the dim glow of the hearth and see her curled up arms wrapped around herself like a bird folding in its wings. She's burning. You press your palm to her forehead. It's like touching a skillet. No boils, no rash, no cough, just heat, pure, dry, dangerous heat. You wake your wife. She's up in a second instinct taking over. She fetches the herbs, yarrow fever few, a crust of willow bark, and starts boiling water. You hold the girl's hand and whisper her name over and over like it's a spell. Oswin stops by later, offers you a spoonful of honey stolen from his winter store. You don't ask how he got it. You just nod and thank him like he gave you gold. The priest comes too eventually, offers prayers in some old Latin that floats through the room like ash. God's will, he says. You clench your jaw. You've heard God's will too many times. When your sister drowned. When the harvest failed. When the steward took your neighbor's son and sent him off to fight a war he didn't survive. God's will. It's always God's will until it's your child. You stare at your daughter. Her breath rattles. Her lips are dry. You drip cool water onto her tongue. She doesn't flinch. You remember the stories. The fevers that came through villages and took children in the night. Scarlet, sweating silent deaths. Saint's fire, some call it. Summer death even when it happens in frost. The midwife says it's a curse. The healer says it's imbalance. The priest says it's sin. You say nothing, because right now you're just trying to keep her here. Historians still debate what killed most children in medieval villages. Typhoid, influenza, dysentery. Doesn't matter. To you it's just fear wearing a different face each time. You hold her close. You sing a song your mother used to sing. About the moon and the fields and a girl who danced in the rain. Your daughter stirs, a flicker, a sigh. You light another candle. You can't afford it, but you do it anyway. Light feels like hope. Your wife crushes the herbs finer this time. Adds a scrap of apple peel. Pours the tea into a chipped cup and holds it to the girl's lips. A drop goes in. Then another, and slowly, so slowly, the heat breaks. It doesn't disappear, not yet. But it breaks. She sweats. Her skin cools. Her breathing deepens. You dare to exhale. You sit there the rest of the night watching her chest rise and fall like the tide. At dawn, she opens one eye and mutters, "I dreamt of bread." You laugh. You cry. You kiss her head. Later that day, the priest returns and says God spared her. You don't argue. But in your heart, you whisper thanks to the herbs, to the honey, to the hours spent waiting. To you. You survived another night. She survived another night. And even though you know the danger will return again and again, fever, plague, famine, death, you also know this. You'll meet it, every time, with every tool you have. And sometimes love will be enough. It starts with a sound you don't recognize, not the clatter of hooves or the creak of a broken cart. It's humming. Not from the woods, but from the mill. The mill silent since autumn is turning again. You walk down the path with cautious hope boots crunching the last of the frost. You expect to see the same broken wheel, the same tilted stones, the same empty sacks. But no. The wheel turns. The river flows faster, its surface no longer choked by fallen branches. Someone's cleared the jam. You see him there, the miller's new apprentice. Young, bright-eyed. Doesn't smell like disappointment yet. He waves. "We've got white flour," he says. Like it's a joke. You haven't tasted white flour since the year of the double hail. You've dreamed of it. You imagine it light as clouds, soft as sin. Later that day, the village baker pulls loaves from his oven steaming and pale. People gather like bees. You trade half a sack of beans and a cracked comb for one loaf. Back home, your family sits in silence as you cut it. No one speaks. It's like slicing gold. You give the heel to the youngest because that's the rule, and everyone chews slowly. It tastes like nothing you remember, and everything you've hoped for. Your wife cries. You take another bite. The change isn't just in the bread. It's in the tools. A blacksmith from 3 villages over now trades at the edge of town. He sells iron spades that don't break in clay. Expensive but fair, and you're allowed to trade now. That's new. The steward has been quiet. Rumor says the Lord's attention has moved elsewhere, new lands, new taxes, new wars. He hasn't ridden through in weeks. No coins demanded. No hens seized. The priest's sermons, still as long now, speak of renewal, of second chances, of sowing what you want to reap, not just what you must. And maybe it's the flower, or the sun, or the fact that the fever passed and left your family whole, but something in your chest feels lighter. You dig new beds in the field, not because you're told to, because you want to. You plant herbs for healing, beans for eating, wheat, not rye, for baking. You patch the roof with reeds that don't leak. You teach your eldest to read a letter, just one. He picks F for freedom. You laugh, you keep going. Historians might call it a modest shift in peasant agency. You call it breathing. You talk to Oswin. He says he's thinking about building a second room on his hut. Not because of more children, just for space. Space to sit. Space to think. You nod. You get it. One evening, the new miller brings something strange, a book, bound in leather. He says he can't read it either, but the pages smell of ink and rain. You hold it in your hands like a sacred object. It feels like the future. Your daughter draws a picture on the wall. A house, a tree, a person with a smile too big for their face. She says, "That's us." You believe her. There's no revolution, no flag raised, no sudden decree of liberty, just the quiet, steady shifting of weight. From burden to balance. The wheel of the mill turns, the dough rises, and for the first time in years, so do you. It's quiet today, not the sharp silence of plague or the cold hush of winter hunger, not even the breath-held stillness before a rebellion brews. This is a different quiet. It's birdsong, wind in the grass, the rustle of your daughter's feet as she chases the dog through the sprouting wheat, the squeak of your wife's spindle, the creak of your knees as you sit in the doorway and watch. You're 50 now, which makes you ancient. Men don't live this long where you're from. Most are taken by war or fever or infection from a broken tooth. But somehow you've outlived your predictions. The fields you once dug with borrowed tools are now yours in everything but title. You still owe labor, still pay your dues, but no one leans on your door demanding a hen by sundown. You sit and eat a bowl of soup that doesn't taste like desperation. There's barley leek garlic and meat, actual meat. You sip it slowly, each mouthful warm and deliberate. You remember harder times, of boiled bark and black bread of snow on your sleeping mat, and screams from fevered children. You remember the night you offered your last loaf to a dying neighbor and went to bed with only hope in your belly. You also remember laughter, dancing in the ruins, scenting yourself with crushed mint, pulling your wife close by firelight while the world outside froze and forgot you. The church bells ring once. You pause, then twice. You stand slowly, not because you're afraid, but because the rhythm tells you someone's gone, not a child, not a tragedy, just someone. An old woman, maybe. Someone who saw what you saw, lived what you lived. You walk with the others to the edge of the village. A cart waits. Flowers, not just rags, lie on the shroud. A small mercy. The priest reads. You close your eyes, and when it's over, you return home. Your daughter has baked a cake. It's dense and a little scorched. She's proud. You eat every bite. Your wife hums as she mends your shirt. You watch her hands. They've aged like yours. Stiff-scarred but sure. You lie down that night on a mat that doesn't sag. The thatch above your head doesn't leak. Your children breathe slow and soft in the dark. And for once you feel no fear. Not of the steward, not of the plague, not even of tomorrow. You stare into the dark and think this is peace. Not grand, not gilded, but earned, honest, stubborn. You lived through famine, fire, frost, and fear, and you kept your hands open. You kept your heart kind. And now you rest. Now the wheel can turn without you for a while. Word count 199. Final lullaby closing. 300 words. And now your journey is done. You've seen the world, not from thrones or towers, but from muddy paths and straw-filled boots. You've hauled water-baked weeds, buried friends, and sang to the stars when there was nothing else to believe in. You've tasted bread that broke your teeth and dreams that filled your chest. You've slept with pigs, dodged arrows of judgment, and still found reasons to smile. You weren't a hero. You weren't a legend. You were a peasant, and that made you stronger than all of them. Because while the lords argued and the priests sermonized and the scholars debated, you were planting, gathering, healing, surviving. While the world turned sharp, you turned inward. You tended fires, you cradled fevers, you taught your children how to hope, and in doing so, you carried us here. So tonight, as you pull your blanket tight and let the weight of years soften into sleep, remember this. You mattered. Not because of what you owned, but because of what you endured. Because of how you kept going when there was no glory in it, only grit. No reward but the rising sun and one more day to share a meal. You lived in the cracks of history, and still you shone. Good night, peasant. You've earned your rest. End of script. Good night.